History usually tells us who died and when. It records battles, executions, and public punishments in neat lines of ink. But there are some deaths history refuses to describe. Not because they were unimportant, but because writing them down was too dangerous. This story does not begin with a battlefield. There is no cheering crowd, no executioner holding a blade above his head. It begins in silence. They didn't want this man dead quickly. A quick death creates witnesses. Witnesses create sympathy, and sympathy creates rebellion. So instead, they chose disappearance. Late at night, when the corridors were empty, he was taken through narrow stone passages beneath the palace. Each step took him farther away from sound, from light, from memory. No one followed. No one asked questions. At the end of the passage stood a small stone chamber. It had no windows, no markings, no sign that anyone had ever been inside before. When the door closed behind him, there was no scream that reached the surface. No official announcement, no written sentence of execution. The records simply stopped. To the outside world, the man had vanished. Not imprisoned, not executed, erased. And that was the point, because some punishments were never meant to be seen. They were meant to be imagined, to live inside whispers, rumours, and fear. Tonight we are opening the door history tried to seal shut, not to shock you, but to understand why silence was the most powerful weapon of all. This is the story of those who were locked alive by H. Public executions were designed to be seen. They happened in open squares, in daylight, before crowds. The goal was simple: show power, end resistance. But rulers quickly learned something dangerous. When people watch someone die, they don't always feel fear. Sometimes they feel sympathy. And sympathy is unpredictable. A man killed in public can become a symbol. A symbol can become a story. And stories have the power to outlive kings. That is why some punishments were moved into the shadows. Locked alive executions were never about justice. They were about control without witnesses. There was no announcement of guilt, no formal trial written into records. The victim simply disappeared. Officials avoided names. Chronicles skipped details. Dates ended abruptly. To anyone reading later, it looked like nothing happened. But to the people living at the time, the silence was louder than any scream. When someone vanished overnight, everyone noticed. Yet no one dared to ask why, because asking questions meant becoming the next name to disappear. Fear works best when it is invisible, when there is no proof, no body, no ending. Parents warned their children in whispers. Servants avoided certain corridors. Guards looked away. The threat didn't need to be repeated. Once was enough. Very few people were ever locked alive. Most were controlled by the idea that it could happen. That is why history stayed quiet. Not because it forgot, but because silence kept power intact. And as long as no one spoke, the punishment worked. The chamber was never chosen at random. It was built for one purpose: isolation. Most were hidden beneath castles, monasteries, or city walls, places where sound already died quickly, places no one visited. The room itself was small, so small that pacing was impossible. Some victims could barely stand upright, others could not fully stretch their legs. Once inside, the door was sealed, not locked, sealed. Stone was pushed into place, bricks were layered over iron, the opening disappeared. Light vanished first, then sound, then time. Without sunlight, the human body loses its rhythm. Sleep becomes impossible to measure. Hunger feels endless. Minutes feel like hours. Food, if given at all, was minimal, enough to keep the body alive, but weak. Water was sometimes left in a small container. When it ran out, thirst became torture. The walls absorbed every sound. Screams echoed once, then vanished. Victims scratched the stone, trying to mark time, trying to stay sane. Most failed. The punishment was designed to do what weapons could not: break the mind before the body. Death did not arrive suddenly. It crept forward, slowly, quietly, and when it finally came, there was no witness to record it. The chamber was sealed again, as if it had always been empty. Rulers did not choose this punishment because it was efficient. It was slow, it was secretive, and it required planning. They chose it because it erased problems without creating symbols. A public execution leaves a body behind. A body creates a grave. A grave becomes a place people gather. Locked alive punishments left nothing. No corpse, no funeral, no story that could be confirmed. Officially, nothing happened. Unofficially, everyone understood the warning. This method was often reserved for people who were dangerous alive and dead. Rivals, disgraced nobles, whispered traitors. Killing them publicly could spark sympathy. Letting them live freely was impossible, so they disappeared. The ruler's image remained clean. There was no blood on the square, no record of cruelty. And yet, fear spread faster than ever. People noticed when powerful figures vanished overnight. They noticed when names stopped appearing in records. They noticed when certain doors were sealed permanently. No explanation was given. None was needed. The message was simple. Power did not need justification. This punishment also protected those who carried it out. Executioners could deny involvement. Scribes could skip details. Guards could claim ignorance. Silence kept everyone safe. And as long as silence ruled, authority remained unquestioned. Darkness does something violence cannot. It turns the mind inward. Without light, the brain loses its sense of direction. There is no sunrise to mark a new day, no shadow to measure time. Sleep becomes random, thoughts lose order. At first, the victims waited. They listened for footsteps, they counted breaths. They believed someone would return. But silence stretched on. Soon the mind began to invent sound. Drips of water that weren't there, whispers without voices, movement in air that never changed. Hallucinations followed. Some spoke aloud, just to hear a human voice. Others screamed until their throats failed. A few went completely silent, retreating into themselves. Time stopped making sense. Minutes felt endless. Days blurred into nothing. The body weakened slowly, but the mind fractured first. Memories became distorted, faces faded, reality bent. This was the true punishment. Not hunger, not thirst, but the slow collapse of identity. When death finally arrived, it was often welcomed. And that is why historians avoided details. Because how do you write about a mind falling apart in darkness? Some truths cannot be recorded without exposing cruelty too deep to justify. There is a reason many historical names never appear in stories like this. Not because they were unimportant, but because mentioning them was risky. In several medieval kingdoms, powerful figures simply vanished from records. Not criminals, not commoners, but nobles who had once stood close to the throne. One such case begins normally, a respected title, land, influence. Then suddenly, the documents stop. No record of trial, no mention of execution, no explanation of death, just absence. Historians later noticed strange details. Payments continued to guards long after the man disappeared. Sections of underground structures were sealed around the same time, and new names quietly replaced old ones in official lists. Nothing directly accused anyone, nothing confirmed anything, but the pattern was familiar. The man had known too much. He had been too close to power, and removing him publicly would have raised questions, so he was removed privately. What happened next was never written down, not by chroniclers, not by witnesses. And that silence tells us more than any confession ever could. Because when history ends mid-sentence, it usually means someone wanted it that way. Historians in the medieval world were not independent. They did not write freely. They wrote under protection and under threat. Most chroniclers were paid by kings, nobles, or religious institutions. Their survival depended on favour, not truth. Writing about public battles was safe, recording coronations was encouraged, but describing secret punishments was dangerous. To write such details was to accuse power itself. A historian who described a ruler sealing a man alive was not just recording an event, he was challenging authority. And challenges were rarely forgiven, so silence became survival. Some writers hinted instead of explaining. A sentence would end early, a name would disappear between pages, dates would stop without reason. Later readers mistook this for lost information, but it was often intentional, because everyone understood the rules. Write what can be seen, ignore what happens in the dark. Even monasteries avoided recording these punishments. Religious scribes feared being associated with cruelty. Political scribes feared punishment, so history developed blind spots. Not accidents, choices. And those choices protected the powerful while erasing the powerless. That is why modern historians struggle with cases like these, not because evidence never existed, but because it was deliberately left unwritten. Silence, once again, did the work of fear.